So I wanted to communicate to everyone living outside Japan the situation with Blue Protocol. I haven't really seen anyone mention what's going on recently, and I thought it would be nice for people to know and understand exactly what's going on. Blue Protocol has been getting updates every once a month, and now while that sounds nice, it hasn't really revitalized the game to what it once was on release or even a few months after release. The game has been steadily declining in popularity in the JP region and hasn't experienced any sustainable recovery in its 1 year of service, which is really sad to see as I'm a fan of this game since I've heard about it back in 2019 where I saw the game having so much potential, but it's getting very mismanaged so far. So before I dive deep into this topic, a little backstory about me. I did play the game for about 2,000 hours and maxed every class. I also placed top 3 in a few of the game's leaderboards. I made a couple text guides here and there. I love this game. I love to beta test it so that the overseas version can be better. But recently I and many friends that also played are starting to push away and cut a lot of playtime from this game. Its core problems and bugs that have not been fixed that are killing off the player base. It's pretty evident that the game isn't doing well when you look at statistics. According to people on 5chan, Japan's version of 4chan, Blue Protocol is currently ranked 119th place on games with total sales on Japan PlayStation Store with a rating of 2.5. It has roughly stayed around that rating since the launch of console back in December 2023. The sales ranking tends to spike when the game gets a major update, but gradually goes down even further every time. It's important to note that console is still huge in Japan. According to an article in 2023, over 70% of every JP gamer is using a console regularly. Now, I believe mobile likely overtook console in this year, but console should still be relatively up there. This means that the console ranking and rating paints a fairly accurate conclusion with how the game is holding up on both PC and console. Then you have a Japanese game journalist website saying that Bandai's Blue Protocol is part of the blame for Bandai losing profit in the current fiscal year. Bandai Online cutting around 16% of its staff of 250 employees since the start of this year. Players speculating how many concurrent users are left, which is estimated to be about 4,000, which lines up with how hard it is to match content if you aren't playing at very specific JP peak hours. And most of the open world zones being a ghost town supporting this. It's a huge rabbit hole, but to summarize, the game isn't doing that great. Now, what are these issues that are holding this game back? Well, the first is the lack of content. This has been a complaint since the game launched, and very little has been done a year later. A common misconception is how people outside the JP region see JP getting all this content announced on live streams and assumes the game is doing well. Well, the reality is that JP is not doing well. Most of the content is copy-pasted dungeons that have almost no exciting fights in them and many uninspired map designs. Almost every dungeon is run to the next room, gather all the enemies, elites, bosses together, press all buttons in almost any order, and then repeat until no more rooms. In a lot of cases, there's no strategy involved after gathering the enemies due to a bug that freezes all enemies, causing them to do nothing if too many skills are hitting too many enemies on the map. This has been a bug for almost a year now and has hurt a lot of the potential the fights could have had. I don't believe that these specific pieces of content will get much better if Bandai fixes the bug, because there's still a core issue with the combat, which is DR, or damage reduction. So what do I mean by that? The game has too many ways of lowering damage taken to flat out negating damage altogether in some cases. Yes, you can take 0 damage. The DR system makes many forms of hard content too easy and makes farming content boring for many people. This is getting worse as more forms of DR are being introduced. Bandai doesn't seem to have acknowledged this problem, which is unfortunate because, well, we're probably not going to see any changes done to this for a really long time. Okay, so I was about to finish editing this video, but wanted to include this bit of information because I felt it was important, because some of my information kind of sounded like it overlapped. If the content is too easy, then Why isn't everyone pretty much clearing it, you know? The fact lies in how the game doesn't really teach the players how to play the game. Many players get to max level by pressing their auto attack and occasionally 1 to 2 skills. Let me show you an example of how to farm in the open world. Okay, so I was about to show an example of open world leveling, but turns out most of the open world leveling zones are pretty dead with no players. No big surprise there. So I'm just going to demonstrate it by open world farming, which is pretty much the same as open world leveling. So pretty much you just sit in one spot, press lock on, spam your basic skills. Yep, and this is pretty much it. We just stand in one spot. Another option to level is to do dungeons, which goes back to my previous point that it's just a running simulator for new players. Typically post-release, new players get carried into dungeons by veteran players farming the dungeon on their alt classes. Today, players pretty much don't need to know what their class does to reach endgame farming dungeons and reach max gear score right after. So when players go from content that doesn't require much level thinking to immediately content that requires them to know how to stack buffs and debuffs, know how DR works, understand how to dodge if DR isn't available, how to rotate buffs with other players, how to do a basic rotation or like even DPS on the class, then they don't want to run it anymore because it's too daunting to learn everything at once in order to not grief the run. Once you understand all these concepts though, then you realize that the content is actually pretty easy. And trust me when I say that many players do not understand how to play their class or understand the gearing system. For example, there's many players at endgame farming dungeons that use B-Imagines that don't provide much for themselves or the team, and it's common to have classes that give 10 to 20% debuffs to enemies, and these players are not casting these skills for most of the farming run. So realistically, the only big motivation left if the fights aren't that good yet is the progression. However, even progression has its problems. It's a sucky feeling to have to grind a copy-pasted dungeon when there isn't much content to use it on as an average player. Then after about 1 or 2 months, most of the gear you grinded for becomes irrelevant as new copy-pasted dungeons get released offering slightly stronger gear. And then according to a survey Bandai done in October of 2023, only 5% of their player base actually cared about extremely challenging content where you have to use min-max gear. Bandai continues to release these types of challenging content that a small fraction of the player base cares about while continuing to release copy-pasted content for the majority audience. That's what's actually being shown to JP players in these live streams and why JP people are upset. They feel neglected that content is being isolated for only a single-digit % of the player base. On top of that, most of the newer challenging content is generally a clear once for the new cosmetics and then never again type of content. So naturally, less people would want to try it as there isn't enough incentive to do it. There isn't enough content in the game that would make the average player want to keep playing. Now, if the content wasn't the deal breaker, it would be the amount of bugs and unoptimizations the game is riddled with. The 1-2-1 error bug is a notable one. It happens very often in solo instances if your ping happened to spike for any reason for a fraction of a second. The game would kick you out and you would often lose all your progress in the solo instance. This is incredibly frustrating within instances where you are in there for almost 10 minutes and suddenly you get kicked. 1-2-1 error code can also happen in raid activities where too many skills are registering on a single target, causing the boss to be unable to fight back or do anything, while also occasionally disconnecting some of the people in the raid. The disconnection mid-raid can also cause people to be temporarily banned from doing raids. Keep in mind that these raids are on an hourly schedule, so being kicked out of one might mean that you have to wait a few hours until the next raid is up. It's incredibly frustrating and there doesn't seem to be like any sort of solution in sight as it's been happening for months now. And then that's just one bug out of 180 plus bugs listed on the official Blue Protocol page. If you want to check out the rest of the bugs for yourself, I will post a link in the description below. And then there's also some optimizations like camera being jarring on some classes, the pain of auto picking up low level gear and having to sell it later, the amount of clicks needed to upgrade plugs or gear. All of these are not that big, but add to the amalgamation of issues that would otherwise burn the average player out. Now, with all that in mind, there's still a lot that Bandai has done well in the game. The Be-Imagine system, which might be where Withering Waves got the idea for Echoes, is very fun to use. The skills are nice to use, and there's a lot of optimizations you can do with them to make them very fluid. The graphics are great if you have a strong enough PC to handle it, the story is decent. All of this shows that the game has potential to pop off if it's managed better. I think management needs to understand who its target audience is and cater to them and not the 5% sweaty tryhards. These guys are killing most of the casuals by releasing fun content that they cannot do. Just look at WildStar or currently Lost Ark. These two games aren't popular, with one of the problems being the devs care way too much about the hardcore player base and not giving enough attention to everyone else. Blue Protocol seems to be following that same path, and I hope they don't stick with it. With the new arena content shown where you fight this boss out of Terra looks very exciting, and I can't wait to try it out. Unfortunately, it's another piece of content that's not supposed to be cleared by at least 90% of the player base, so if we're ever getting change, it won't be for a while, it seems. Bandai does seem like they're releasing minigames as update and housing in a future update. Maybe there's still hope for the majority, but I hope they do something about the combat and the progression, which are the game's main selling points at the moment besides the cosmetics. Well, anyways, if you want to see the new update at the end of this month, stop by my Twitch channel. You will be able to chat with me in real time and see firsthand what it's like playing Blue Protocol. I'll be covering it when it first comes out in June 26. If you'd like to stay informed about Blue Protocol's progress or want to see more Blue Protocol content, be sure to like and subscribe. This was very fun to make, and I enjoyed informing everyone on the situation. Thank you all for watching, and catch you all in the next one. Peace.